All right, welcome. Come join us in the sanctuary, everybody. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. They got married, so well. Nobody ran off. I need to talk to you about the wedding recipes. About wedding what? How do you do the wedding blessings? Do you say them or do you sing them? Like the Shalom? Yeah. I kind of chant them. I don't really do like a whole house of music. But, yeah, I'm not musical, you know. But, yeah. All right, I'm not the good person to practice with, but I could show you what I know.
That's really nice.
Last year, nobody came down.
What's up with that?
What's up with that, Archie?
Is it okay if I put my sheets up here for a minute?
Of course.
Okay, well, I'm gonna be. Is it okay if my phone's in here? Or should I put it in your study?
That's totally fine. Whatever. Also, I mean, I'm going to have my phone out until we do the Mari service. So.
Okay. I'll put mine away.
Like, I'll be able to keep notes.
Look at this thing.
Yeah.
It's like almost a joke how big it is. Do you use this?
So, shut up.
That's so cool.
There you go.
I want a open edition of that. I think it's huge.
I know people. All right. Hey, everybody. Come on in. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. All right. Still see that we're missing a few people. Put the cheesecake down and come to the sanctuary. I love cheesecake. Love that the most lactose intolerant people have a day dedicated to dairy. It's awesome. Yeah, people ask me, by the way, what my favorite Jewish holiday is, and I say, I got asked this at an LDS church, and I told them it was Shavuot, and they said, what do you do on Shavuot? I said, we study scripture till late in the evening, and then we eat cheesecake and desserts, and we also talk about conversion. And they were like, that's what Mormons do every week. And that was the closest I came to converting, so. Well, welcome. We'll get started. Thrilled to have you here. We got some colleagues here too. Colleagues plural. Tomorrow I actually won't be here. You know, I don't work on Jewish holidays because I'm religious. Just kidding. But it's in case you aren't aware, my family, my wife and I, we have an 18-year-old adopted daughter, and it's her high school graduation tomorrow. And she's graduation speaker, actually, for her class. Very proud of her. So, but apparently with boarding schools in San Pete County, they don't take Shavuot into consideration when scheduling events. So I won't be here tomorrow, but my friend and colleague, Rabbi Alexis Pinsky, will be. And tonight, also I want to welcome Rabbi Joe Charnas over there, friend, and who's from Colorado, who's in town with his daughter. His wife is also a colleague, Rabbi Spector. Yeah, that's the daughter. And so thrilled to have them. And also, I'm thrilled, of course, to welcome here my good friend and colleague, Rabbi Jeff Dreifus from Temple Har Shalom. And Rabbi Dreifus and I, we want to thank him for being here because he was leading a social action, a civil rights trip to the south with his congregation, and actually changed his flight to make sure he could be here for tonight, and flew in and basically came straight here. So very thrilled to have Rabbi Dreifus here. We led a trip like that a few years ago, and I've found that Rabbi Dreifus and I have a lot in common: our shared love of civil rights, a deep passion for Israel, and also a shared love of the mountains. And it was almost like the Temple Har Shalom search committee said, how do we find our own Rabbi Spector except have him be slightly younger and better looking? And Cole and me was fine with that. They said, so long as our guy is taller and funnier. So paid off. So Rabbi, we'll just use one. Park City rabbis. Anyway, so like I said, Rabbi Dreifus has quickly become somebody I consider a good friend and a colleague, and thrilled to have him here. A little background on you. You are a Tennessee native, and you grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. And am I getting that right? And upon being ordained, you started your career at the synagogue that you grew up at as an assistant rabbi. Imagine that. And so you are, I would say, a Tennessee guy, a Memphis guy through and through. And the only thing that could pull you away from Memphis was the mountains. You said that you love the mountains. And another thing that you and I have in common is that I don't think that there are any other rabbis in the country, any other progressive rabbis in the country who, when they're being ordained, were to be asked, where is your dream place to go? And they would say Utah. And both you and I are in the place we dreamed of, and are thrilled to be here, and love being here. So what I want us to talk about tonight, and this says I just got back from my first month of sabbatical, and I'll talk about that some, but there's a big, heavy focus on mountains with that. I want us tonight, as we celebrate Shavuot, which is a holiday where we celebrate the receiving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, and I'll talk later about, was it a coincidence that happened on top of a mountain? Tell me a little bit about how you find spirituality in the mountains, and also your license plate, I believe, even says is Mountain Rabbi, right? So yeah, mine says Cheesecake Rabbi, so we have different. Just kidding. So tell us a little bit, Rabbi, about what it was that you love about mountains so much that drew you, was the one thing that could pull you out of Memphis, and how maybe you find religion and spirituality in mountains and in our mountains here.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's such a privilege and an honor and a pleasure to be with you tonight, to be on this bima, bringing in the Chag of Shavuot. I hope this is the first of a lot of things we get to do together, and may they all have so many lovely people and cheesecake. Amen. So I actually grew up in one of the flattest places in the world, Memphis, Tennessee, the Mississippi River alluvial floodplain, very flat. But I was really lucky that as a kid, my dad took me skiing. And I always felt, I'm not sure I knew how to put into words as a little kid, but when I was on a chairlift, or I was on a cat track and could just look and take in the quiet, the views, imagining, okay, I'm here for this little space of time, but what's happening on the mountain at every moment when people aren't here? I even from a young age, sensed that mountains are a place of stillness and of beauty and perhaps something even more. I had the great privilege as a rabbinical student to serve not the flattest community in the world, but the Frozen Chosen in Juneau, Alaska, which was very special. And every Shabbat, after Torah study, we'd go for a hike. And it was the first time in my life, I was so lucky as a kid to get to go to a lot of beautiful places, but it was the first time in my life that I realized people live in a place like this. And I don't know, it just had never crossed my mind. And I realized that Shabbat after Shabbat, as I first said, oh, this is a fun activity for us to do, but then I realized this is these people's Shabbat practice. And one day, I guess one day in rabbinical school, I learned there's a blessing for holy places, for grand works of nature. And I was on this hike, and I had this moment of not only wow, but thank you. Thank you, God, for giving me this moment. And the blessing that I'd learned sometime in rabbinical school, maybe weeks or months before, just came out of my mouth. And I realized in that moment, it's not only a beautiful place, but it's a holy place. And I think all of us who live in Utah, who are so blessed to live in this Zion, not Zion, from which the Torah came and comes, but this, actually someone corrected me the other day, is it Zion? How do you pronounce Zion? Zion, thank you. It's not Zion, it's Zion National Park. Thank you. But I think for those of us who are lucky enough to live in Utah, we all have had that sense at one time or another. And I hope what we'll talk about in the next little while is Judaism has known this for a long time. Of course, the Torah was given on Mount Sinai, but there's so much in our tradition about how mountains are a place of holiness, of connection, and where not only where we can connect to God, but we can connect to the God inside of us. So I want to ask you, Rabbi Sam, I don't know, is that format okay, or are you asking all the questions tonight?
We're pretty laid back here in Salt Lake City.
You're not, yeah. But Sam, Rabbi Sam just came back from, of course, the tallest mountains in the world, and so I want to ask you, how has, you grew up in California?
Seattle.
In Seattle? Oh, you were in California, excuse me, you were in California.
But yes, I moved east to Utah. A little background on me, my life on one foot. I grew up in Seattle, then went to college at UC San Diego, then after my year in Israel, did rabbinical school in LA and became an assistant rabbi in LA, and then here. So I mean, I've been in, certainly in Seattle, my house had a view of the Olympic Mountains, and I tell everybody, Seattle has two seasons, the rainy season in July 29th, and so on July 29th, I would see Mount Rainier, and it always, I made a point every summer to go spend a day at Mount Rainier and read a book. And then in San Diego, of course, a beautiful place, and Los Angeles is a place, sorry, Angelinos. But one thing about Los Angeles is you got the Santa Monica mountains there, what they call mountains, we'd call them hills, but and hiking and stuff in that urban setting is a big thing there. So anyway, sorry, go on with your question.
Well, my question was, what was it like being in the Himalayas? And you also learned from a people who developed a spiritual practice and a set of spiritual teachings around mountains.
Yeah.
Share some of that.
Sure. So something that stood out to me was my last 3 days in Nepal. Let me tell you a little bit about what my week in Nepal looked like. My first day there, I went around sightseeing with a guide in Kathmandu, and we went to some very holy places. There's 7 UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the Kathmandu Valley, and 2 of them are Buddhist stupas. Now, a stupa is a temple that has a very tall spire, a monument. And I asked about that, and they said, well, they believe this is the place where heaven and earth meet. And the stupa, in a way, much like a mountain, was pointing up at the heavens, if you will. Now, I'll get to that point in 1 second. But with the largest stupa, with one of the stupas, it's on top of a hill looking over the whole town. And another stupa, that's a UNESCO site, the largest one, planes are not allowed to fly over it, or directly over it, because it would be considered breaking that plane between heaven and earth. Then I went to some monasteries, and those monasteries ended a few days of meditation practices with Buddhist monks, and those were all on top of hills again. And my last 3 days, I did a homestay in a very rural town with a very devoutly Hindu family. And in this town, there was this hill, and if the president of my board of trustees wasn't here, I'd tell you this hill was a bitch to climb up. Like but I won't say that because she's here. This hill was like a straight, had to be 50 degrees, or just you were walking like this, and I was huffing and puffing, and it was insane. And I'll show you pictures sometime. These Nepalese women were just walking up the hill with probably about 50, 60 pounds of produce and hay and stuff on their backs. And they were just tied on to their head. And maybe it was more than that. These bales of hay were larger than them. And they were just walking past me up the hill. And one day I did a hike with one of the locals up this hill. And I'm like, he's taking me to a temple on top of the hill. And I'm huffing and I'm puffing and I'm dying. And the only hike I've ever done that I think was more challenging than this was climbing Mount Sinai itself in Egypt. Sorry, my life is dope. I do cool things. So, I'm just kidding. And so I tell him, I'm out of breath. I'm like, this better be worth it. And he says to me, because it's so hard, that's what makes it worth it. And it made me think about that climb that Moses did, and I'll talk more about that later, and how at age 80, he had to climb up this insanely steep, tall mountain, come down with stone tablets. They chucked them at a golden calf and had to schlep up there again. But if it was easy, would it have been as meaningful? That's what I thought about. My turn to kick it back to you. While I was there, and this is, I guess, what I would say too, I'll tell you in a second. I read a book called God in the Wilderness by our colleague, Rabbi Jamie Korngold. She is known as the Adventure Rabbi. That is how she has been dubbed. And she was based out of Boulder, Colorado, and she started her own synagogue that does not have a synagogue building, but rather it's entirely in nature. And what I'll be doing for my second month sabbatical is I'm going to go to the Adventure Rabbi for a weekend to experience Shabbat with them. And she was telling me, and this is what I was going to say about the stupa, I was like, well, isn't God everywhere? And she said, that's a very modern concept. Like, that's not what the ancient Israelites believed. They believed God was in high places, and mountains pointed to the heavens, and that water, which was so crucial, came down from the heavens, and trees were important because they point to the heavens. And in her book, she notes that it wasn't really until Deuteronomy, which biblical scholars think was written much after the other 4 books of the Torah, that we see a transition of holiness going from nature to the city center, to the temple, which is built on a hill, to a temple, and that was perhaps intentional to consolidate power. But she said that was not original Judaism. And I asked her, why do you think so many of these holy, like, why are mountains important? And she told me, she said, because we don't read that anything special ever happened in the middle of a big city. People never found God walking in the middle of Jerusalem or in the middle of whatever. We don't find God in cities. Now, you told me when I mentioned Rabbi Korngold to you, you said her book is one of the things that inspired you in your rabbinate. Where our congregations are a bit different. By the way, an area where I'm very envious of your congregation, something we did wrong. I think we have a beautiful synagogue here, but we have this incredible view of the mountains from our parking lot, and we chose to build our sanctuary in the middle of the building where you cannot see them. You guys were a bit more thoughtful in how you built yours with a view there. Wintertime is your busiest time of year, is what I've heard from Har Shalom rabbis. And by the way, your name of your synagogue even means mountain of peace. And that's because you have people who come from all over the country who are in Park City for the winter time. Our folks here, so that's when your congregants show up. Our congregants here, mostly over 99% of them live here year-round. Winter's like my slowest time because nobody wants to meet with me. They want to go skiing, but that's when your congregants are there. What does your congregation do, or what have you added in your rabbinate to help bring that nature to people? Because, again, they have homes, very expensive homes. Keep saying I'll trade my top 5 donors for yours at any time you want, but no, okay, no, it's all right. But very nice homes, are multi-million-dollar homes that they are at for only 3 months a year or something, but they come for peace and respite. And so how do you bring Judaism to them when they clearly are coming here for the mountains? What are things that you guys do at Har Shalom? Because what I often hear when I'm asking, why is nobody showing up on Saturday mornings on blue sky days in the wintertime? This year we got no snow, so people showed up for services. Pardon? You're a Har Shalom? Security, escort that man out of here. I asked, why aren't you guys here? And they say, well, my synagogue during the wintertime is the ski slopes. What do you guys do to help bridge that of giving people a meaningful Jewish experience while they're here, and still they're here for those mountains and because they love them so much?
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm glad you brought up Rabbi Jamie Korngold's book. Well, it was so inspiring to me. A friend recommended it when I lived in New York City, and maybe that's why it was so touching, because I lived in this concrete jungle. But the illustration that she gives that spoke to me so much was, she said that every single encounter with God in the Torah happens in nature. So it's not until Moses leaves Midian that he encounters God. I mean, I don't think Midian was a booming metropolis, but in those days, it was a big town. Is that, you read the census? You remember that? Impressive. But yeah, 5,000 would have been a big city, and it's not until Moses leaves Midian that he encounters God in the burning bush. But even before then, right, in the book of Genesis, Isaac maybe didn't have the best experience on the mountain, but Jacob encounters God when he leaves his home, when he lays down in the middle of the desert. He looks up, he lays his head on a rock. Probably could have found something more comfortable, but he lays his head on a rock, And he has this dream, and of course, the angels are, we don't exactly know what this means, but going up and down in his dream. And he wakes up and he says, Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh ve'anochi lo yadati. Wow, God is in this place, and I did not know it. And then again, Jacob encounters God along the banks of the Jabbok River. The water's rushing by. Jacob has this encounter with the Ish, which, is it an angel, is it a man, is it God? But we know that his sparring partner says, you have wrestled with beings human and divine. And we know that he encountered something holy next to the water. There are many other examples in the Torah. Of course, what we're celebrating tonight, on the top of Mount Sinai. That's when not only one or two people at a time, but all the people encountered God at Sinai. So I think there's deep spiritual insight in Rabbi Korngold's message that we are wired as human beings to find holiness in nature. And some very smart person, I don't know who it is, if anybody's been in Park City a long time, you may know who it is, but about 27-ish years ago, somebody had the great idea to have a service on Deer Valley on Friday afternoon. We call it Ski Shul, and if you haven't been, would love to have you. Yeah, Jews come from all over the world. We meet in this little hut off of the Sterling Lift in Sunset Cabin, and when it's nice out, and actually the last couple years, this is my first year in Park City, but the last couple years, apparently there's been such crowds that you have half the people inside, and that fits 20 or 30 people, and then you have another 30 people outside on the porch. And on a nice day when it's sunny and it's warm, which described pretty much every day this winter, we have 60, 70 people. Some are from Park City, but Jews from all over the world coming and celebrating Shabbat in this holy place. I think, even though you're right, and I'm so grateful to the visionaries who built our synagogue, it's a very beautiful synagogue, the insight that I think I can help people find is the reason they moved to Park City is because they love nature. But what we can show them is that nature is a place where they can find holiness, where they, like our ancient biblical ancestors, can encounter God. So we do ski shul on Friday afternoons, but we also do what I call a spirit walk. So I wanted to do, June and our women of our Shalom did this, but I wanted to do snowshoe bishvat and do a little Tu B'Shvat snowshoe. It also ended up being a hike. But between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and hopefully we'll start to do this more and more, we do a spirit walk where we go to, some people here were on it. And we go to a beautiful place, and we read Jewish texts, and we sing Jewish songs. And maybe if I can find a little baby Torah that will fit in the backpack, we can even read Torah. But the idea that Judaism has to be practiced within four walls makes us, it occludes a potential to see something we miss when we're inside.
No, I mean, one of the things that Rabbi Korngold said in her book is that within walls and buildings and people, there's limits, and nature can be limitless. So one of the things, too, I guess we find we got some windows up there, but one of the things they didn't ask me when we built this in 1972 for my thoughts, but one of the things that we read in the Talmud is that there is supposed to be windows in the place that you pray. And the reason is so that you can look out while you're praying. And Judaism is not something that's supposed to just happen in the building. It's supposed to be something that we, like what we learn in this building or whatever when we study Torah or when we pray, is to, it's really practice for the big game is what I tell people that we need to apply in the world out there. And so part of being Jewish is that we learn in the first chapter of the Torah that we are supposed to be stewards of the world and rule over the earth. And some people take that we have and subdue it, and some people take that we get to exploit nature however we want. But others, I'm one of these people, read it as we are stewards of the earth and we have a responsibility to take care of it. And so perhaps with imperfections in nature, we can see beauty in that. Also think of our own imperfections and ways to improve ourselves. What do you think, Rabbi, are ways that through Judaism we can build a better world outside and through nature, and by actually getting out of the walls of our synagogue and using this incredible natural surrounding we have? How can that inspire us to put Judaism into action? And I wonder too, again, I think a lot about names of why people name things, certain things. When I interviewed here, they asked me what questions I had, and I said, is Kolami spelled with a kaf or a kuf? Because that was going to tell me a lot. Your synagogue literally means mountain of peace and peaceful mountain. How does the name of your synagogue and also the surrounding and getting out and stuff reflect your community's vision for what we can, what the world is and what it could be?
Man, I know journalists often have an ethic where they won't share their interview questions in advance. That was a tough one. Maybe we should have gone over these before, but. Come on. So, how do we allow nature to change who we are? Or how do we change nature and be partners with God? I think that, so much today we think about not changing nature, but being stewards of nature. In the Torah and in rabbinic literature, the mountain is often viewed as a liminal space, as a space between two phases of our lives, between little boy Isaac and a little more grown up, so a lot more traumatized. Exactly right. He goes up a boy being led by his father, and he comes down ready for the next chapter of his life. The Israelites, we go up to the mountain as a nation just freed from slavery, and not a nation, just as people freed from slavery, and we come out a nation in covenant with God. I think about Elijah, who, according to some traditions, goes up that very same mountain, the same mountain the same mountain that Abraham and Isaac went up. And God said, it's so different. It's the opposite scene as what happens at Sinai. Sinai, we have kolodu vrakim, we have thunder and lightning. It's this terrifying display of God's might. But in Kings, when God tells Elijah of Passover fame, but it's like Santa Claus rides around with the sleigh and the reindeer. I don't know how Elijah gets from house to house to house on For my conservative Jews here, Santa Claus but I was, never mind, I'm not going to go down that tangent. But God tells Elijah to meet God on the mountaintop. And it says there's a great and mighty wind, but God was not in the wind. and then I think an earthquake, and then a fire. And God wasn't in these massive displays of God's might. But instead, the Tanakh says, a kol demama daka, that God came to Elijah as a still, small voice. And I think that it's by taking time away from the hubbub of the city, of our daily lives, of our to-do lists, of these miraculous curses that each one of us holds in our pocket, that keeps us tethered to our notifications. We can take a step back from all of that and enter into the quiet and the peace of the mountains. Then, and only then, perhaps we can hear that kol demama daka, that still small voice. I think that it's by listening to that voice that we can decide, I don't want to live the way I've been living. I don't want to, whether that plays out in an environmentalist way, whether that plays out in just living a more intentional life. I think that mountains and nature in general has that power that we can tap into.
All right. Well, thank you. One of my other journeys I took in life was to Azerbaijan, and there is a group of Jews there in Azerbaijan. Actually, the world's last remaining shtetl is in Azerbaijan, and I got to go there for Shabbat. It was amazing. It was like legit Fiddler on the Roof vibes. And yeah, anyways, they call themselves, they even have their own language that they speak called Judeo-Tat. And they call themselves Mountain Jews there. And so when they were asking me about my community, I said, we're America's Mountain Jews. And I think that that's something you and I both, that attracts us both to this special place. And that we have, as Rabbi Korngold did in Boulder, Colorado, have the ability to use these incredible things that God gave us right outside our door and use those as tools to enhance Judaism for folks. In a couple of minutes, we're going to have a brief Ma'ariv service, and then we're going to do some learning with Rabbi Dreifus. I asked Rabbi Charnes on the spot if he would give us a brief teaching after that, if he's still around and up for it, of maybe something Shavuot related, to take advantage of him being here. And then I'm going to teach, I always go last when I'm hosting. I'm going to be talking about Exodus 19 and what we can find through the revelation of Mount Sinai, of the Torah on Mount Sinai, and what that chapter tells us about the holiness of mountains and that experience, and give us kind of a conversation to think about and have it be interactive. Rabbi, like I say, you just came back from, like literally just got off the plane from leading a civil rights trip in the South. Tell us a little bit about what you're going to be teaching for folks who want to stick around.
Is it okay if I share one more mountain idea also real quick, because you made me think about? Give a mic to a rabbi. It's like giving a mouse a cookie. Isn't that? So I'm going to be teaching. We talked a few months ago about having the theme of this Shavuot, mountaintop Judaism. And I had a few ideas. I was going back and forth in the last couple weeks, and I grew up in Memphis. On Sunday, I had the chance to show 45 members from Temple Har Shalom, the congregation I grew up at. It was very special for me. And we went to so many places in Memphis where we didn't just learn about history, but we touched history. And we were hearing somebody speak about Martin Luther King's last night in his life, April 3rd, 1968. And the speech that he gave is referred to, of course, as the mountaintop speech. I have seen the promised land, he says. And I realized, that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is this speech, which if you're ever feeling bad about yourself, if you're ever feeling bad about humanity, if you watch this speech, you cannot help but feel like human beings have the power to tap into something truly holy, to be a part of something so much bigger than any one person. Of course, Dr. King is who so many of us associate with the civil rights movement, but it was a movement. And he was just one of so many people who dedicated their lives to righting this terrible injustice. So I thought it would be kind of interesting to say Dr. King, of course, a Christian minister, but he, over the course of his life, absorbed absorbed so much Torah. I thought it would be interesting to look at what are the Jewish elements inside of his mountaintop speech, and how does that message that he gave, he could have done so much more, and yet this was as far as he got, like Moses, right? He never got to see the promised land, and yet he gave us so much. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at that speech from a Jewish lens. So we'll do that. But I want to share one really brief idea, which is that Jerusalem, our holy city, when you go to Jerusalem, we say you go up to Jerusalem. You make aliyah to go up to Jerusalem because it's elevated on a spiritual plane, but it's also elevated topographically. You literally go up to Jerusalem. But the rabbis teach that there's two Jerusalems. There's Yerushalayim Shel Mala and Yerushalayim Shel Mata. Upper Jerusalem and Lower Jerusalem. And the Upper Jerusalem is the Jerusalem of aspiration, of what the world could be. And Yerushalayim Shel Mata, the Lower Jerusalem, is Jerusalem as it is. Jerusalem with that guy in the shuk screaming at the top of his lungs, with the green garbage bins that smell terrible, that sometimes they forget to pick up. It's the real stinky, beautiful, messy world. And our job as Jews is to try to turn Yerushalayim Shel Mata into Yerushalayim Shel Mala. How do we get heaven and earth to meet? And according to our tradition, it's through our action, through what we choose to do with our lives, that we can help, as your friends in Nepal taught, how we can have the heavens and the earth kiss.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing about that, Rabbi Dreifus. I hope you stick around. I know that this holiday goes a little late, so some people might not, so I just want to say, but if you're about to leave, by the way, check out, we got a bunch of stuff happening this weekend for Shavuot, and also a young adult thing Saturday night, Squire's Pub about Israel. Come check that out for people aged 21 to 40, free drinks and food and stuff. But people have been asking me, since it's your first year here, have you gotten to know the Har Shalom Rabbi, the new Har Shalom Rabbi? What do you think? And I've said, we are so fortunate to have you here. And I think tonight, anybody who didn't know you before tonight can see why I feel that way. And I'm really, really, really excited to have you here, and also excited that you are a person who is excited to be here. Like I said, you got your Utah license plate and it says Mountain Rabbi on it. I think probably Mountain Bishop or Mountain Elder was taken, but not Mountain Rabbi. And Mountain Prophet. Yeah, the last one, President Nelson, he skied until his early 90s. Yeah, anyhow, I'm excited what you and I can do together, and hopefully this is going to be the first of many events and learning opportunities that we do together, including us going up the mountain to you. And I'm excited for all that, and also what we're going to do, the potential that we have for doing things outside of the walls of our synagogues and in this beautiful sanctuary that God has provided to us right outside our doors. So with that, we're going to have about a 20-minute Ma'ariv service. If you would like to stick around, we have the red Lev Shalom books out there. And then after that, we'll do some more learning with Rabbi Dreifus about hearing a bit about that speech from Dr. King. Thank you. Okay. We are. We will begin lighting our candles. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel yom tov. We are going to begin on page 39 with Ma'ariv Haravim. Hold on, let me get there. There we go. I'll invite you to rise by your spirit. So do Baruch. Baruch hu et Adonai hamevorach, Baruch Adonai hamevorach le'olam va'ed, Baruch Adonai hamevorach le'olam va'ed. You may be seated. Baruch et Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'dvaro ma'ariv ha'arvim b'chokhmah patei asherim u'b'bina mishnei etim u'machalif et hasmanim u'masader et hakochavim b'mishmerotehem barakir kirtzonu borei yom v'layla golel or mimnei choshech v'choshech mimnei or u'ma'avir yom uvein u'mevi layla u'ma'avdil ben yom uvein layla Adonai Tzivaot Shemo El Hai v'kayam tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed Baruch et Adonai Amariv Aravim. We'll turn to page 40. Ahavat olam Beit Yisrael Amecha Avta Torah u'mitzvot ukim u'mishpatim otanu limadita al ken Adonai Eloheinu b'shavenu uvkumenu nasiach behukecha v'nismach b'divrei Toratecha uv'mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed ki hem hayenu ve'orech yameinu uvahem negei yom v'layla ve'atcha al tasir mimenu le'olamim Baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hashem kivat malchut olam va'ed. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol meodecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'elei asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinatam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtaha v'betecha u'letecha v'aderech v'shofbecha v'kumecha u'kshartam leot al yadecha v'hayu letotavo b'einenecha u'ktabtam al mezuzot beitecha u'visharecha. 42. V'hayayim shemot. Yomer Adonai Moshe Limor Adonai Anu B'nei Yisrael V'amat V'ayam V'osvah Tzitzi V'olkevei V'yirei V'dorto V'nanu Al Tzitzi Kankaf V'ziltei V'yachem V'zizi V'ritam Adonai Elohechem Emet. We will go to page 44. U'malchuto b'ratzon kivalu aleihem Moshe u'Miriam u'bnei Yisrael anu shira b'simcha rabba v'amru chulam mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh norati lo Osefele Ma'utecha Ra'u Vanecha Bokei Hayam Lifnei Moshe u'Miriam Zeli Anu Ve'amru Adonai Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed V'ne'emar Kifad Adonai Yaakov U'galo Miyad Hatzak Mimenu Baruch Atah Adonai Ka'ah Yisrael. We will turn to 45. Ashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom ve'amidenu malkeinu l'chaim ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha u'shmor tzeitenu u'voleinu l'chaim l'shalom me'ata ve'ad olam ufores aleinu sukat shlomecha baruch atah Adonai hapores sukat shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael ve'al Yerushalayim. Let's see, page 46, second paragraph. Invite you to briefly rise. Oh, no, you don't have to rise. All right, up to you if you want to. Vayidaber Moshe et moedei Adonai el bnei Yisrael. Hatzi Kaddish. Yekadav Yekadash Merabah, Be'amadi Vrachirte, Ve'emlich Malchute, Ve'chayechonu Ve'mechonu, V'chayedho Be'Yisrael, Ba'galayus Makari Ve'meru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevora, Le'alam Ome'el Maya Yipara, Yipara V'yishtabach V'yipar V'yishtamah V'yinaseh V'yetadar V'yetaleh V'yetalal Shmei Gusha B'reihu, Le'elam Mikol Berchata V'shirata, Tushbechata V'nehemata, Dahami Rabbe'alma V'meru. Amen. I'll invite you to rise and bow your spirit. Silent Amidah is page 306 through page 313. You'll want to make sure that you add the Shavuot edition, especially 309, or you can use this as an opportunity for your own prayers and reflections. When you're finished, you may be seated. We will turn to page 54. Shalom. Yada v'yada shmei Rabbi, be'amadi v'achirtei v'michmachutei v'aychon v'yumechon v'chayinah v'Yisrael v'aglah yisman krei v'miru. Yesh me Rabbi mivorach le'olam omer maya yibara ibra v'shtav v'yivar v'yitramam v'yanaseh v'yatadar v'yitalei v'yidol shmei d'kusha b'reihu le'elam mikol berchata v'shirata tishbe'ata v'neim atata mimram be'amah v'yimeru. Tikabal soton uvoton v'chol Yisrael kodom avuchon tipi mishraya v'yimeru. Yesh lama Rabbi min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Oh, say Shalom b'momav, say Shalom aleinu al kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Amen. We'll turn to page 79 for Kiddush. Shalom by you to rise in body or in spirit. Savricharai, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol am, v'ram amanu mikol lashon, v'kishanu b'mitzvotav, v'atidemanu Adonai Eloheinu be'ahava, moadim l'simcha, hagim uzmanim l'sason, et yom hag hashavuot hazeh, Zeman matan Toratenu. Second, page 80. Mikra Kodesh, Zecher Tziat Mitzrayim, Kivanu Vaharta Veotanu, Kidashta Mikol Amim, Umoadeh Kodshechas, Besimcha Ufsason, In Haltanu, Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh, Yisrael v'hazmanim. We'll say as well. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shechianu v'kiyamanu v'hikiyanu lazman hazeh. We will turn to page 56 and remain standing for Aleinu. Aleinu l'shavech l'adon ha'kol, la'ateki l'aleotzer b'reshit, shelo asanu kirei ha'aratzot, lo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam halkeinu kahem, v'gor leinu kehor hamonam, v'anachnu korin, u'mishtachavim u'modim, lifnei melech, malchei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shehunatei Shamayim v'yosed haaretz, u'moshav yikaro b'shamayim imal, u'shinatu zo, begofei meromim, hu Eloheinu eino, emem malkeinu efezulato, kakatu b'torato, v'datayom v'hashivota, elevavecha, ki Adonai hua Elohim, b'shamayim ima'al, Hoshio haaretz v'al haaretz, mitacha einod, al ken nekaveh lecha Adonai. HaKatuv b'toratecha, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, v'nemar v'haya Adonai, l'melech al kol ha'aretz, v'yom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo echad. Page 58, mourners and those observing Kaddish. Yikadal v'kadash shemei Rabbi, be'alma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayedechol be'Yisrael, ba'agalat v'yisman kari v'imru. Yehei shmei Rabbi mivrach le'olam omei omei, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, Yitadar v'yitalei v'yitalal shemei d'kudusha b'rihu. Leila mikol berchata v'shirata, tush behata v'ne'emata, dam iram be'alma v'imru. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru. O say shalom b'mrumav, hu say shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru. Amen. We are going to conclude, how about, with a song about the Torah, because, hey, Shavuot. So how about we'll do Al Shlosha Devarim. Al Shlosha Devarim. Al Shlosha Devarim. Al Shlosha Devarim. Ha'olam Omed. Al Shlosha Devarim. Al Shlosha Devarim. Al Shlosha Devarim. Ha'olam Omed. Al HaTorah ve'al HaAvodah ve'al Gemilut Hasadim. Al HaTorah ve'al HaAvodah ve'al Gemilut Hasadim. That comes from Pirkei Avot, means on the whole world stands on three things: study of Torah, worship of God, and acts of loving kindness. So let's do those things. Let's see. And I finished a few minutes earlier than I anticipated. Rabbi Cantor Spector, well done. So how about we'll take like a 3-minute stretch break, or if you need to use the restroom, and then about 5 minutes or so, my friend and colleague over here is going to teach us, and I look forward to learning from you. So, yeah, we'll give it about 3-5-minute break.
It's easy.
What's your last name?
Charnas.
Charnes. Okay.
Yeah, now,
Honored
my
to meet
cousin lives in Park City.
Okay.
Joanna Charnas.
Joanna Charnes? Is your
Yes.
cousin?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Well,
You're
she
right.
pronounces it
No,
Charnes.
you're right. And I learned this in my 20s with another of our cousins. We were at a restaurant and they wanted to know the name. I said Charnas. My cousin says Charnes. I said, what? She says, it's Charnes. I said, it's Charnas. She says, no, your dad says Charnes. It's Charnes. I said, why? Nobody knew. So I asked him. He was being called Charnes. I remember she was at our Shalom.
She's been there forever.
I
She
know.
found it.
So
She wanted
you're there
to-
now. Now, what was the other guy's name?
So the last guy was Rabbi Levinsky.
Okay, who was before that?
And then Josh Aronson was the founding rabbi. We had a couple interims along.
Okay, then maybe it was an interim. There was someone with my wife who was a co. They were in the seminary together. I don't remember his name. I think it was Russian. But
We had an interim named Sai, S-Y-N-E.
I remember that name because Joanna, we were talking about coming up here. They said they had so many things booked, and I said, well, don't worry about it. But no, that's
Well,
great.
I don't know if you know, her husband passed away. Yes, he passed away.
No, wait, I've been on vacation.
He passed away. His memorial was actually Sunday, but he passed away about 3 months or 2.5 months ago. And he had a really debilitating.
I know that. Yeah, I remember that. I can't believe she I saw her last year.
She's been, everybody handles grief their own way. But she's,
Thank you.
yeah, of course.
Thank you. I just wanted to know. That sounded so harsh. Wow. But you're not far from here, right? You're like
25 minutes, 25 minutes. Took from, well, the shul, it was 23 minutes from my house. And I think it's about 30 minutes door to door. I live in Park City, but on the Salt Lake side. So I live in Pinebrook, which is like, if you're taking I-80 from here,
Okay.
I'm the first exit before you turn on 224, which is the highway to Park City. That would be great. If you ever are in town, you want to get a job, you want to meet you in the pew.
I'm coming back in August. I do things with the bishop in the Episcopal Diocese of the and I teach at BYU. So, and this summer I'll be going a lot in Europe. I do academic for the SBL, AAR, Society of Biblical Literature.
Okay.
So I have two strange areas. One is Jewish, that's strange, and the background's traditional. I was with boys and black.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. My boys, that's where I'm still most comfortable, but I'm uncomfortable in other ways. But that's where I go when I have my free time, because I'm used to it. We go to what we're used to, you know. We don't have communal or often. There's tension. But my two areas are Jewish, obviously, and in the Christian world, I teach on Paul and Jesus and their Jewish. Yeah, so that's why I went to Europe to do that. It's fascinating. It's been a world of discovery, whether we agree with Paul or not. In some areas, we're just parting ways tremendously. It's tragic what Christianity is lost from. And I'm not just trying to, because I'm Jewish, I want to Jew up Paul and Jew up Jesus.
Oh, thank you so much.
Which one's for Elijah? That one? Okay. Oh, wrong night, sorry.
Should I open one for him just in case? Hey, Gullies. Nice to meet you too. Rabbi Jeff. Yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you. Chag Sameach. Well, I guess we should get started. But I hope we'll see you soon. Let's get together when you're here. That'd be great. Okay, Chag Sameach. Okay, want to get started? Yeah, sure. Oh, actually, will you help me pass out?
Yeah, sure. Here, I'll distribute those and you can just start. You got waters or anything? Oh, good. Anything you need from me?
Will it pick me up?
I will check. I'll look at the stream. I'll tell you if you're standing somewhere. Yeah. Okay. All right, everybody. Feel free to take your seats. Rabbi Dreifus is going to begin teaching us. Thanks for sticking around. By the way, if anybody does need to leave early, I certainly will not be offended. And I won't be offended if anybody needs to leave early. We understand it's a work night for some folks and it's late, so don't worry about offending us. But please, we'd love to have you stay, of course, as long as you're able to. So without further ado, here, Rabbi, I'll pass those out, and you can. Do you need one? Okay, you can begin teaching us.
I'll use this for now. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Now officially that we've lit the candles, Chag Sameach. Thank you. Thank you again to Rabbi Sam for hosting us, and I would love it if you don't mind next year schlepping up the hill. We'd love to have you at Temple Har Shalom and do a home and home. We'd really love to have you, and can't wait for us to think of things we can do together, hikes. If you have ideas about what we can do together. Amen. Amen. So I want to, tonight we're going to go through a few different quotes. I don't know if we'll get through all of them. A few different quotes from Dr. King's mountaintop speech. I wish we had time to listen to it in its entirety, but I do recommend after the Chag, if you want to go home and pull it up on YouTube, I guarantee you will feel better about yourself and about America after you, and about the world after you watch Dr. King. But it all begins and ends with injustice. Dr. King said, the issue is injustice. The issue is the refusal of Memphis to be fair and honest in its dealings with its public servants who happen to be sanitation workers. So to give you a little bit of context, if you don't remember, the sanitation workers in Memphis, the people that picked up our trash, were asking for a 10-cent raise, asking for a few other things as well, but were asking for a 10-cent raise. Before they went on strike, there was a really, really bad rainstorm, and 2 sanitation workers got in the back of their garbage truck to try to get shelter from the rain, and there was some kind of mechanical error, and the truck crushed them both to death. And that was after a series of complaints about working conditions, of incredibly poor pay, and enough was enough. And Martin Luther King, who had already gotten the Civil Rights Act passed, who had already won the Nobel Peace Prize, he came to Memphis to argue on behalf of the people who picked up our trash for a 10-cent raise. And for Dr. King, it was all about injustice. So, of course, in Judaism, we have so much about justice. One of the brachot that we say every day, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Ohev Tzedek Umishpat, God who loves justice and righteousness. And we have this command in the Torah, which a literal justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Zichrona Livracha, had the Hebrew of which on her wall of her chambers in the Supreme Court, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. Now, the doubling of this injunction has generated quite a bit of rabbinic commentary. The folks on the stream probably need us to talk in the mic to hear, right? Okay, so throughout tonight, I'm going to ask you for commentary. I'll do my best to repeat it for our folks watching on the stream. But I'll go ahead and read these for simplicity's sake. Ibn Ezra, I had a third and I cut it, but now, so we'll start with text number 2. So Ibn Ezra says that this doubling means that we should pursue justice, whether it profits you or it costs you, all the days of your life. That justice is a permanent orientation and not an occasional act. So that's his explanation of why tzedek, why we have it twice. The Torah, of course, the rabbis believe there's no wasted word in the Torah. That's the explanation for this doubling. But especially for Dr. King, I think Reb Simcha Bonham's explanation is so fitting. The means must match the ends. Only with justice shall you pursue justice. That you can't achieve a just outcome through unjust methods. When you think about the movement that Dr. King started, in order to be a part of the Montgomery bus boycotts, in order to march in Selma, you had to sign a piece of paper that says, I promise to be nonviolent. If the people, the police who unleash dogs and water cannons on children, if they engaged in violence no matter what, we, said Dr. King, are going to be nonviolent in order that the world see our humanity and the inhumanity of our oppressors. So when we think about the struggles we have in the world today, different groups struggled for freedom, I'll leave it there, but different groups struggle for freedom or self-determination. We look at the outcome from Dr. King's methods, we look at the outcome from other nations' methods, and what our rabbis teach is that in order to achieve a just outcome, we have to have a just method. Yeah, please, go ahead.
But he was also willing to not reach the outcome.
We're going to get there, but here, why don't you speak into the mic real quickly?
So Dr. King believes so much in nonviolence that he was willing to risk not getting to the end, not just for himself, but as a whole. His nonviolence movement wasn't just for civil rights, it was nonviolence as an ideology, as a theology in everything. And while the goal was justice, the hope was justice, even if we never reached there, he wasn't going to change from nonviolence. And that's a hard bet to make.
Thank you. It's a hard bet to make, and not everybody would have approached it the way that Dr. King approached it. Dr. King famously said something like, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Of course, we have this great Jewish organization, Bend the Arc, that such a Jewish idea. God created a world that we hope one day will be perfect, will be redeemed, but it's our responsibility to bend that arc, to be God's partners. But Dr. King said, even if I don't get there with you, right? He knew that, and he said that this night, April 3rd, 1968. He knew that maybe he wouldn't get there. And yet, even if maybe there was a way to hasten the outcome, if that way of hastening the outcome involved an unjust means, that was not the road he wanted to take. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. Great point. Any other comments on what we've read so far? So we have, of course, from Micah of do justice, love I left out a little Hebrew, but do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. Anybody ever go to social justice rally, march? You ever see that sign? No. That's a sign we see a lot at social justice marches. I know social justice marches have gotten hard for Jews to go to because we're not always welcome anymore. But before October 7th, before this latest round of anti-Semitism, whenever I go to a march, this was a quote that I often saw on signs. And I think it gives us chizuk, it gives us strength to know that what we're fighting for today, what Dr. King was fighting for, that we stand in a long line of people going all the way back to our biblical prophets who were fighting for justice, and yet justice isn't it. It's not, if the having civil rights, having equality under the law is the just outcome, maybe you could have achieved that through more violent means more quickly, perhaps. I mean, or perhaps not. But for King, it wasn't only about justice. There was more. There was kindness. There was humility. And so I think it's important when we remember Dr. King to think of the whole picture, not just the goal, but the way that he achieved it. Okay, so let's move on to this quote. We'll do this one very quickly. He said, somehow the preacher, and I think about how many preachers were in the room with him, how many preachers were in his, on his team. I actually got to meet yesterday, I wish I could remember his name, but a reverend who was a reverend but also served as Dr. King's bodyguard. And so many of the people in this movement were men of God, were people who had first devoted their lives to community, to God, to righteousness, and then devoted themselves to the movement. It's a little intimidating sometimes to teach in front of other rabbis, to preach in front of other preachers. So I think about who was in the room and who he was speaking to. But he said, somehow the preacher must have a kind of fire shut up in his bones, and whenever injustice is around, he must tell it. Somehow the preacher must be an Amos, an Amos, not the guy with the shelf-stable cookies, but the biblical Amos. He says, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. So, of course, that is a direct quote from Amos and also from Jeremiah. I almost said Moses, but Martin Luther King had absorbed so much of the Torah, of the Bible, that every time he spoke, he just exuded these holy words passed down from generation to generation. But I brought this up not to dissect these words, but to ask the prophets of biblical times, how were they received by the people they preached to? Not like they weren't winning any popularity contests, were they? How many of them were successful in their lifetime? What'd you say? Jonah. Right, Jonah, the only truly successful prophet that we see where the change happens in his lifetime in response to his prophecy is Jonah. He doesn't have the happiest ending, not a happy ending. And interestingly enough, the people who repent, who turn back, who he's preaching to, not Jewish. I don't know if that has anything to do with it or not. But also, Dr. King, he made a lot of enemies, right? You think about J. Edgar Hoover, and James Earl Ray, who ended Dr. King's life, or at least was convicted of ending Dr. King's life. I'm not going to advance any conspiracy theories here, but there are many people who do believe that perhaps he was working for the government, for the FBI. Who knows if that was true or not, but there's certainly many enemies that Dr. King made, whether they were part of the establishment, whether they were hateful bigots who lived in the South, but who lived anywhere in the country. And there's something about speaking out for justice that a lot of people don't want to hear, and that's part of his story too. Liz.
Who were asking him to wait and take things slowly instead of now. And there was a rabbi even included in that he was writing to. So we are often on the wrong side of history, unfortunately.
Well, the Jewish experience and the Jewish response to the civil rights movement is certainly an interesting component. My community in Memphis did a big exhibit on Rabbi Wax, who if you were alive at the time, you saw Rabbi Wax if you had access to a television or a newspaper. Rabbi Wax got in the face of Mayor Loeb, the mayor in Memphis who refused to give the sanitation workers a 10-cent raise. Mayor Loeb refused to do so, even though our rabbi, Rabbi Wax, who had been the intermediary, he had been the, what do you call the person who facilitates? Mediator, thank you. The mediator between the sanitation workers and the mayor. He was the president of the Memphis Ministers Association. He actually had, it's a stain on the Jewish people of Memphis, but the mayor himself was born and raised a Jew. He converted, by the time he was mayor, he had converted to Episcopalianism. He married an Episcopalian wife, but he was a confirmation student of Rabbi Wax. And Rabbi Wax got in his face on national TV and said, there are laws greater than the laws of Tennessee, and those are the laws of God. And he said, you, Mr. Mayor, need to follow these laws of God. So just in that one interaction, we have a Jew standing up for justice, and we have a Jew on the wrong side of history. And in this exhibition that our synagogue put together a few years ago, they found letters written to Rabbi Wax after this experience, after this moment in the national spotlight. I had the privilege of reading my grandfather's letter to him, which they found in our archives, which, thank God, was on the right side of history. There were many, many people who their grandkids probably wouldn't be proud to read what they wrote to our rabbi in those days. And it was very much a divided community in Memphis and Birmingham. Birmingham all the more so. Birmingham, the Rabbi Milton, I'm blanking on his last name, but anybody know? I don't think it was Milton Steinberg. Could have been. But he was the one who Dr. King was responding to in a group of local clergy, as you said, had written Dr. King a letter asking him, don't make so much trouble. And Dr. King said, from a Birmingham jail cell, our people don't have time to wait. If you saw the injustice that I see, if you saw, and then he goes on and talks about these everyday experiences of black people that cannot be abided, he said, you wouldn't wait, and I can't wait. But you're right, the Jews and many people, for white people, for whom their daily experience was comfortable. They didn't see the suffering of other people as something that mattered to them. And that's really what this next text number 3, is all about. So the first question, this text number 3, the first question that the priest and the Levite asked, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? The Good Samaritan, he says, reversed it. If I do not stop, what will happen to him? What will happen to him? And I brought the Great Samaritan from Luke, but we don't have to read the whole story. But even though this is the New Testament, we have a scholar here of early Christianity and the overlap between Christianity and proto-rabbinic Judaism. But this idea of the Good Samaritan is such a Jewish idea, that lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. We, of course, also have Rabbi Hillel. It's amazing this rabbi was named after the group on college campuses, but see, Sam's not the only one with rabbi jokes. Rabbi Hillel, what did he say? He said, im ein ani li mili. He said, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, he said, what am I? So we have to stand up for ourselves as Jews, and that's a story in 2026 and 5786 that we all know that if we don't stand up for ourselves, unfortunately, there's fewer and fewer of our friends who are going to stand up for us, although thank God in America we still do have a lot of friends. I think as Jews today we have to remember that. But if we only stand up for ourselves, that's antithetical to what it means to be a Jew. Why? Why, even though we are called the tribe, right? We're all members of the tribe, or I don't know if you're a member of the tribe, but if we have any non-Jews here, Bruchim Habayim, welcome. Glad that you're here with us. If you just came for the cheesecake, that's totally fine too. But we're not tribal. We don't only care about ourselves, precisely, I would say, because of this line from the very first chapter of the Torah, that God created human beings in God's image. B'Tselem Elohim. Each and every person has a little nitzot, a little piece of God inside of us. And maybe that's not the only reason, but for many of us, for Judaism, that's justification enough. That little spark of holiness, that little piece of God inside of us is a reason to treat other people with dignity, with honor, with respect. And that's what so many in the South, and not just the South, so many in our country failed to do. And I was just in Birmingham 2 days ago. And we walked through Kelly Ingram Park, where in 1965, I believe, the parents, the adults were too afraid to march. Because if the adults had marched for their rights, they would have lost their jobs. They would have lost their homes. But one of Dr. King's lieutenants had the idea, well, the children. Dr. King was actually really on the fence about using kids. He wasn't so sure it was the right thing to do, especially at first. But when they started talking to teenagers, and even some kids as young as 6, they decided, well, they can't fire us. We're kids. And they were so brave, and they, over the course of a few weeks, engaged in what is called the Birmingham Children's March. And there was one day in particular, I'm sure that you have seen the images, where essentially the sheriff, Bull Connor, turned these massive police dogs and water cannons, not just one water cannon, they actually would combine 2 cannons together and spray them in one hose to increase the pressure, the water pressure. And this pressure was so great that it ripped the hair off of kids' scalps, that in some cases ripped the skin right off their body. And Dr. King's strategy, same thing in Selma. When Dr. King went to Selma to help, if anybody has been to Selma, you know it is a backwater. It is a very sad town. Even today, there's 19,000 people. In that time, there's 55,000 people. Very, very impoverished, very sad town. But he went there to help the activists who were already there in the movement. And he said, in Selma, is your sheriff here a Pritchard who was docile and, I don't know if I'd say gentle, but a little more humane, or is he a Bull Connor? And because in Selma, like in Birmingham, they had a Bull Connor for a sheriff. They had a ruthless person, not afraid at all to use force. Dr. King said, this is where we want to show the American people, the people of the world, that we are humans. We're going to wear our Sunday best. No matter what they do, we are going to hold our heads high, and we're not going to be violent. And we're going to show the world their inhumanity. They can't see our humanity, but the evil that they perpetrate on us, the world is not going to be able to look away from. And even white people who maybe were pro segregation. When they see what segregation really means, there's no way they'll be able to still look at it and not be on our side. And he was right. He was right. And it's precisely because so many Americans during the civil rights movement finally saw the Tselem Elohim, the image of God, in people, even though, do we have any doctors or scientists here? How thick in millimeters does the pigment of our skin go? Anybody know? You're a doctor. It's measured in millimeters or less. If you look at a human being, 3 millimeters, something in that order of magnitude, under their skin, we all look the same. So they saw that the Tselem Elohim existed in every single person, except perhaps for the people perpetrating the evil. Maybe they extinguished, in some cases, their own spark. Right. You said even in our genes, we're nearly identical. I don't know what tenth or hundredth of a percent difference, thousandth of a percent difference that makes in our DNA, but minuscule. Now we're getting part 4 to one of the most famous lines. Well, I don't know what will happen now. He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land, and I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. What's so Jewish about this text? Ellen said just about exactly what Moses said. It's true. Poor Moses. He slapped the rock twice. His whole life's work, he didn't get to make it to the promised land. But yeah, just like Moses, Moses viewed is that our next text? No. Yeah, Moses could only view the land from Mount Nebo, which I think exists in Utah also, isn't there? Yeah. Pretty much any biblical place somewhere in this state. But what else is Jewish about this most iconic line from this speech? The idea of a promised land. Where do you think Dr. King got that? Right, Dr. King, of course, got that from us. And what's Harriet Tubman's nickname? The Black Moses. Harriet Tubman, who leads the Underground Railroad, leads her people to freedom. Our Exodus story, which we tell on Passover, which we read, of course, in the Torah, it has been adopted by so many people, so many liberation movements in history, and of course, most famously in this country, by the civil rights movement and by the abolitionist movement. Anybody read On All Other Nights by Dara Horn? Great book by Dara Horn. One of the 5, I'm just going to put it out there, 5, maybe 3 best living Jewish novelists. And she wrote a book imagining a Jewish spy going to the South in the Civil War. Of course, we know Judah Benjamin, the number 2 in the Confederate government, unfortunately was a Jew. But there's a scene in that book where the spy goes down to New Orleans and is seated around a Passover table. And at the Passover table, they're reading the Haggadah, they're telling the story of our people's redemption from slavery to freedom, and they're being served by slaves. Being served by slaves. And it is obviously, it's dripping with irony, but it's something that we as a people, except for maybe a couple dark spots in our history, that's always been a part of what it means to be a Jew, is to stand up for the other, for the oppressed. But what else is so Jewish about this idea, this text? Beautiful. So this idea of amiyut, of peoplehood, that whether we're a Jew in Park City or actually got to meet last night the nephew of one of our congregants in Park City, who's the nephew 2 nights ago won the Democratic primary to be Alabama's next lieutenant governor. Who knew? He's right now serving in the legislature. I mean, it's in Alabama. He's probably not going to win. But it's still, who knows? Doug Jones is at the top of the ticket running against Tommy Tuberville. So it's a possibility. But he's the third ever Jewish state legislator in Alabama. But whether you're a Jew in Alabama or in Utah or in Ukraine, we are all part of the same people. And we have this text from our tradition that Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Bazeh, that we are all responsible for one another. And Dr. King is certainly tapping in to that idea for his people. But I think, Ellen, the last thing that you said, which is that he sees himself as a part of it, even if he himself doesn't make it to the promised land. We have this text from Rabbi Tarfon in Pirkei Avot, Lo lecha hamlacha ligmor, velo ata ben chorin levatel mimena. That you might have heard the song. We sang it at camp when I was a kid. But that it's not our duty to finish the work, yet neither are we free to desist from it. What the heck does that mean?
It's kind of like how the Torah is promised to future generations, and like they're the ones who are like to inherit it. And it's a similar concept of just it's not for us necessarily. It's for the future. It's to make a better world. It's to heal the world. And yeah, it just can't be something that we center on here and now and what we want, but what the world that we want our children and grandchildren and future generations to have.
Anybody else want to add to that? Jude and Rabbi?
I see it as being that it's the action that's the most important thing, the work, the doing. It doesn't matter how far you get as you're doing that work, but you are in fact acting.
The last half of the phrase, but neither are you, too close? Oh. I'm not great with mics. But neither are you free to desist from it. In the Hebrew, levatel also has a much stronger dimension to its meaning, which is to nullify. And so what it's saying on another level is if we're not participating, we may not complete it, but if you don't participate I'm sorry, what was your name, ma'am? June. June, yeah, you spoke about the action being important. The action, not the result, but if we're not engaged, it's as if we're nullifying everything that was done before it. So our action is central and critical.
Thank you. I've sometimes seen this text as lehivatel, and sometimes seen it as livatel, and I don't know which one. I think it's just an alternate. But do you know which text is more authoritative? And the song is, I was singing it as lehivatel. Oh, it's livatel. Oh, livatel mi mena velo ata ben chorin. It's a great, maybe we'll sing it at the end. But thank you that this idea that if in any one, well, to start with June's beautiful point that we may be daunted by the task. I mean, imagine being black in the South. First of all, being a slave. But even if we go to the 60s, the 50s and the 60s, these people had been free for 100 years. And yet, if a white mob decided that a black boy or a black man looked at a white girl the wrong way, they could lose their life in a gruesome way. There were 4,000 lynchings that we know of in this country. And to be totally powerless, to realize that no matter what you do, if you give all the evidence that you, your brother, your son was in a different place at that moment, if you have a perfect alibi, if you can attest to the goodness of their character, if a mob decides they want to lynch you, you're going to be lynched. Imagine what it must feel, what that powerlessness must feel like. And yet, if we don't work, if they hadn't worked, if Rosa Parks hadn't refused to stand up on that bus, if the Freedom Riders hadn't gone down to the South, if all those students hadn't sat in the Woolworths and the lunch counters, each and every one of them built on what the ones before had accomplished. And sometimes we might find the task too daunting, and yet we have that responsibility. And if, as you said, Rabbi, if in one generation they decided, Dayenu, it's enough, who was it? Reverend Billy Kyles, who was the one who caught King as he was shot at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. He went over, Rabbi Greenstein, who's the rabbi in Memphis, he told the story of when he was a young rabbi. Reverend Kyles came over to his house for a Passover Seder. And he said, "What is this?" To the Haroset, which is a very reasonable question the first time encountering Haroset, right? But he said, "What is this?" And he said, Rabbi Greenstein said, "Oh, it represents the mortar." But Reverend Kyle said, "Well, why is it sweet? Slavery, of course, was not sweet." And then Reverend Kyles gave a drosh to Rabbi Greenstein. He said, "Wait, I get it." He said, the most insidious kind of oppression is when the people who are being oppressed find it sweet. When the people who are being oppressed don't yearn to be free. When they become content with their lot, that is the worst kind of oppression. And so if we stop even for one generation, if we stop doing for one of us, if we stop doing the work, as we said a minute ago, in Aleinu l'taken et ha'olam b'malchut Shaddai, to repair the world, then perhaps that cancels the whole enterprise. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to, let's go ahead and move to the very last section. Would somebody like to read number 6? You were voluntold. Do you want to read?
What would you like me to read? Which part?
You want the King opens?
King opens. If God...
This is the very beginning of the speech, but I wanted to save it. This is the very beginning, or right near the very beginning of the speech, but I wanted to save this part for the end.
If God allowed me to live in any era of history, I would survey the whole of human experience and come back and say, quote, "If you allow me to live just a few years in the second half of the 20th century, I will be happy," close quote.
Thank you. So, it's a little strange, right? King lives in this very dark time. Any era of history. Black people, his people, had plenty of better times and places than the early second half of the 20th century. If you think at the beginning of the Memorial Sculpture Park in Montgomery. Has anybody been to the sculpture park in Montgomery? Amazing. So do you remember the very first sign on your right? You probably have it in your photos. The very first sign when you walk in lists by country the number of people who were ripped from their homes and kidnapped and taken across the ocean to be slaves. And you think about, there were, I don't want to give you the wrong number, but in the many millions, I want to say 12 million, could be wrong. Somewhere in that range were taken. 20% died on the way, didn't make it here. But their homes, their countries, in many cases, were very stable. They had traditions going back thousands of years. They had rich cultures. They were comfortable. They had agriculture and fishing and all types of beautiful and rich societies. If you were African American in the 50s or 60s, but African, it seems like most people would say being black in America in the middle of the 20th century is one of the worst times to be alive, not one of the best times to be alive. So I want to ask you, why do you think Dr. King, the very last night of his life, shared that perspective?
I guess the way that I would interpret it as Dr. King saw that he was on a mission to change things permanently for the better for people, and this was a significant period of time, a time of leverage, a time of phase transition, where the people that he was working with and the words that he was saying would be instrumental in making a significant change in society and for the people. And being a part of history in that period of leverage when maybe people didn't see hope, I think, would be one of the most critical times.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I think he was hoping or implying that later on, well past 1968, he'd hoped that it would be better. And we saw that for a few years, and it was.
Thank you, Liz. Anybody else? Okay, let's go here and then to Rabbi Sam.
Makes me realize that after his death, we had a black president. The degree of progress that implies in terms of the thoughts, feelings, beliefs, willingness of our American population to accept that reality, be comfortable with it. I think at the same moment, this is a very sad moment for us because what he strove for, what he was very effective in having legislated in terms of the civil rights. We now are living through a time where I would say almost violently that's being taken away from us. So it does say something about the tides of history, but I can see from his point of view that he understood that the future was moving at least in a better long time direction.
Thank you. Would Martin Luther King have ever thought that America would elect a black president? And of course, your skin color is not the only determinant of your character or your fitness to be a leader, but the symbolism of having a black president when, less than 100 years later, less than 100 years before, we think back to what life was like for black people in this country in 1908 versus 2008. This morning I was at a lynching site in Georgia, and I think it was 1908 or 1909, when a young black man was lynched, that a century later we could have a black president. And yet many people feel today like the long arc of the moral universe that Dr. King had so much faith in, people worry about which way the arc is now bending. Okay, Rabbi Sam.
You mentioned, Rabbi, Mount Nebo earlier, and I used to look at that story with so much sadness of like Moses is so close and then he doesn't get to enter the promised land, and yet God allows him to see it. And at first I was like, why would God do that? That seems like almost like taking my kid and saying, well, you can't have any candy, but I'll let you stand in front of the candy store and look at all the candy you can't have. It felt cruel to me. But then becoming a parent myself, it changed my perspective, where I was like, maybe it was actually an incredible act of compassion, where Moses is seeing what the people who followed him, what his children will inherit, and how their lives will be better than what his was. And with Dr. King, this is such a prophetic address, speech, and sermon, especially given that it's the night before he would die, and this is a Mount Nebo moment. Now, he was our age, you're my age, it was like, what, 38, something like that. That's how old I am. And he was not an old man, but I think given the amount of publicity he had, the amount of threats he'd gotten, I think he was well aware that he was not going to live to see old age, that at some point he would be killed. And I don't know if he knew it was be tomorrow, but still. And so with this address, it feels like that there's almost an ethical will component to it, like at the end of Moses' life when he goes up Mount Nebo, and then he also addresses the people of, here's what I want, how I want you to behave. So you asked, I think your question was, why did he give this address? Even though he was very young, I think he realized it was his Mount Nebo moment and an ethical will to his followers. The thing I'll say about that is that at Yom Kippur we talk about, may you be written in the book of life. And I struggled with that theologically a lot, because it's like, well, wait, if somebody dies, does that mean that they weren't written in the book of life? Did God decide, so, but how can we say a child did something wrong who died? Or I don't see a 97-year-old who dies and I go, wonder what they did to not get written in the book of life, a translation I prefer is like in the Avinu Malkeinu, it says, may you be written in Sefer Chaim Tovim, the book of life, good lives, of lives well lived. And so for Dr. King, I think he, with his awareness that he was likely not to live to be advanced age, he was prophetically saying, should my life end tomorrow, and this is my Mount Nebo moment, here's what I want you to take from this.
Thank you. So I'm going to take two comments and then we'll close up this section of the night. But Rabbi, you remind me of a story I've been hearing Rachel Goldberg-Poland tell as she tries to find meaning. Yeah, of course. Yeah. As she tries to find meaning in the loss of her son Hirsch, who was kidnapped on October 7th and later murdered while in captivity by Hamas. And she tells this story, or this idea, from the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic Judaism. And the Baal Shem Tov taught that we're put on this earth to do just one act of chesed. Just one act of loving kindness is why God puts each and every one of us on this earth. And she says she finds comfort in the fact that even though Hirsch was 23, something like that, when his life was stolen from him, that he did so many acts of chesed. And whatever act that in God's eyes was the reason he was put on this earth, he did it. And she's grateful for that. And we think about Dr. King, who, right, I mean, you're 38, I'm 37. Yeah. Your beard is ever so slightly grayer than mine. But when we think about how young he was, and yet all the chesed he brought into this world. Okay, I will take, can you remind me of your name? Julia. Take Julia, and then Liz, and we'll close with 2 ideas.
Just remaining this third part, which says, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? The Good Samaritan reversed it. If I do not stop, what will happen to him? And remaining what happened in Israel in October, actually we are remember as well the Dr. Luther King. So what are we doing to, sometimes my English is not perfect, but to make smaller the feelings of anti-Semitism? What are we doing now as Jewish? We need to work on it. We have very important resources like the Jewish knowledge about 3 things. Personal development, actually, other thing important is about wellness and finances. Everybody wants to know about that. And there are many rabbis online who can teach that. And if the people learn about that, they will change their perspective about Judaism. Because the most of people don't know what is the real Judaism.
Thank you so much for bringing us back to that idea. And you make me think of Hirsch's best friend, Aner Shapira, when Hirsch and Aner and about 15 other people were crammed in a tiny little shelter, like the size of a porta pot, 3 porta potties together. When Hamas was throwing grenade after grenade after grenade in, Aner would grab it and throw it out. And finally, I think after throwing 8 out successfully, the 9th blew up in his hand. And so not caring, as you said, about what will happen to me, but what will happen to someone else. And that really embodies Dr. King. Liz, I want to close with just one idea, with 2 ideas. One quote from Esther, which when we think back to 1968, why does King choose this time? Thank God. Why, when he wakes up in the morning and says, "Shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'hegiyanu azman hazeh," why am I grateful to be here in this moment? It's Mordechai and Esther. And Mordechai tells Esther, "La'et kazot." Perhaps it was for this precise moment that you were put into this world. And I think that MLK recognized that it was for this moment. As you said at the very beginning, he was born at the moment when his people stood at the precipice. And perhaps if he had been born 100 years before, 100 years later, his people wouldn't have reached that promised land, even if he didn't live to see it. I want to close with one story about Reb Zusha that you might have heard. But Reb Zusha, as he lay on his deathbed, he started crying out in fear, in despair, And his students said, Rabbi, what do you possibly have to worry about? You're such a great, amazing mensch, an amazing person. And Reb Zusha said, he said, when I get to the pearly gates, when I get to heavens, I'm not worried that the angels are going to ask me, why weren't you more like Abraham? Why weren't you more like King David? He said, I'm worried they're going to ask me, why weren't you more like Zusha? And I think for Dr. King and for each one of us, Dr. King was blessed to recognize La'et Ha'et Kazot, the moment that he was born for, the reason, the one act of chesed that he was put on this earth to do. And so I think as we think of the gift of Matan Torah, the giving of Torah, my prayer for us is that each and every one of us finds our own letter in the scroll, that we find our place, our act of chesed. We don't have to be Dr. King. We just have to be June or Ellen. We just have to be us. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May it be God's will.
Kol hakavod, Yasher koach. Thank you, Rabbi Dreifus, for gracing us with this wonderful teaching. I'll tell you, have 4 daughters and you'll get some more gray in your beard too. Thrilled to have you here. I'm all about collaboration with other rabbis. That's why I decided to invite Rabbi Dreifus here and also decided to dress like Rabbi Zippel tonight. So, yeah, with oh, he would like that one. I grew a long beard. I trimmed it. People were starting to confuse me with Benny, so I said, yeah. So I trimmed that up. But I was pleased to see that we also have Rabbi Charnas here. What a wonderful honor to have you as well. And I know I kind of put you on the spot, so feel free to say no. But did you have a teaching for us this Shavuot or something to share in your back pocket? If no, that's totally all right. Please come on up. You need let's take a 3-minute stretch break and then give Rabbi Charles a few minutes. Then I'm going to kick it over to you. Yeah, we got 3 rabbis here, so any of my conversion students who are still here, stick around and we can dunk you tonight. So, wow. That started giving me chills. Yeah, are you going to follow the family business? Smart. You have more sense than me and your parents then. Or, All right, folks, I think we're going to get started. It's getting late. All right. Like I said, we are very lucky to have Rabbi Jarvis here visiting us from Colorado. So I'd love to turn it to him. Like I said, I put him on the spot tonight. He was here as an attendee, and I said, for us in Utah, it is a treat when we have another rabbi visiting us. So thank you for letting me put you on the spot. Us rabbis always have to have a teaching in our back pocket, so I'm glad you got one for us tonight. Please, we'd love to learn from you.
Give me a time frame here, because what time are we at?
10.
So 5-7 minutes?
Sure.
Okay, up to 10? Is it all right if I sit? Let's all go into lotus position and levitate. First, I just want to thank you for your teaching, because what I want you to know, don't count my time yet, what he did this evening with all of those verses that you wove together and still kept yourself within an hour time frame is a real work of art. Because no, when I saw that, it's like, all right, this is 2 hours. No, you really worked them all very well into each other, and you made it personal, intimate, and relevant. So thank you. And I look forward to your wisdom too, Rabbi Sam. Thank you for this honor. We began with a mountain discussion, and I'm sure we're going to have more discussion with the mountains. But what was interesting is they brought up the idea of Moses schlepping up the mountain several times with tablets coming down. I don't think it was as high as your mountain, Sam, but it was a schlep. But what's fascinating is we all know that mountains have, and nature has, this call, this draw, if we have hearts that are open. But there's also teaching among the rabbis in the Talmud and the Midrash that Mount Sinai was not a very high mountain. It was a very low mountain. It was the smallest mountain, because it was there to teach us about humility. So the question is, each one of us, according to the rabbis, has a dimension of Moses within us. We're a 60th. The rabbis love that number. We're a 60th. They compare in the Talmud many different aspects of life, and they give it a 60th. This is like a 60th of this. This is like a 60th. Sleep is like a 60th of death. So we're a 60th of Moses. And so what I want to just relate to us tonight is Moses going up and down the mountain is not simply about Moses. It's also about us. There's a dimension of us. We may not be at the level of Moses, but we're at our own level. And the idea of Moses going up the mountain, this mountain that is the smallest of mountains, why did the rabbis associate receiving Sinai with humility? And again, there are two different paradigms. It's the highest mountain, or it's a high mountain, or it's a low mountain. I think when the rabbis give us different options, they're telling us that it's both of them. It's not an either or, it's a both and. And the idea of the height, the high mountain where we receive holy wisdom, and the low mountain where we're taught humility, the idea, I think, is that the greatest height, the greatest level that we can ascend to, that we can reach in our spiritual walk, in our spiritual search, is humility. That is ultimately our highest and greatest practice. And you brought down Micah 6:8, to walk humbly with your God. And that verb, to walk humbly, v'hatznea, is a very rare word in that form, because it's telling us how difficult and how rare humility is, but also how central it is to a sacred practice. And imagine, it doesn't mean we're not devoted, we're not dedicated to our sacred practice, but it means our sacred dedication never compromises another person's path in life, whether it's on the secular, wherever they are on the spectrum, rabidly secular or rabidly frothing religious. I sometimes froth at the mouth too. And by the way, talk about gray. Come on, folks. I only had one daughter. No, I'm twice as old as you almost. But the idea here that I'd love to leave us with, and we need more silence in our practice. You brought up Kol Mama Daka, about the still small voice. We also have in Psalm 46 to be still and know that I'm God. Harpu u'da'u ki anochi Elohim. We need a practice of stillness, of stilling, and of silence. In Psalm 65, it speaks of L'cha dumia sehila. To you, silence is praise. There's a practice of silence that will lead you into places that words never will. And we always in our synagogue start off with first chanting, holy texts, and then we move into silence, and then we begin to pray, and then we study. And so what I'd love to leave you with tonight is just the vision of Sinai, the eternal relevance of Sinai for our humanity, for our world, and for our own inner sacred world, our own sacred walk. Is as we go up the mountain, however high it is the greatest height. It's the highest of all mountains. And that level that we are achieving and receiving starts with humility. If we're not coming from a place of deep, enduring humility, we're never going to rise to the heights of holy light, of holy wisdom, and of holy living. That's what walking humbly, walking in the Hebrew Bible, is the idea of living. That's how Hebrew expresses living your life. Noah walked with God. Abraham walked before God. It has nothing to do with presence. It has to do with a way of life. And so my prayer for us on this day of, 2 days, you keep 2 days, right, here? Because I see a Reformed sitter out there, so I'm not sure where you are. 1.5? 2 days, okay. So keep as this, it's a meditation. It's a daily meditation and a daily practice. That our spiritual heights, our spiritual ascent is grounded in humility. We will never rise if we're not grounded in humility. Deep roots of humility will allow us to blossom in a way of sacred beauty that nothing else will. So I pray that humility is our practice, that we walk humbly with our God, and we honor others who have their own sacred practice, and that's how we're going to live together in peace and bring together community so we can make this world better. Chag Sameach.
What's up with going on tonight? All these rabbis are sticking to the time I gave them. I was like, never happened.
Oh, I wanted to thank you. But I loved what you said in terms of that it could be the highest mountain or the smallest, but the essence is humility. And Moses' greatest characteristics, we're taught, was humility, and he was our greatest leader. So thank you for both. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
You get our extra time.
Yeah, right? All right. Well, I don't know if I'll use all of them tonight, but I won't be sensitive. I know it's late. And thank you. Wow. This is a treat for me as well. One of the reasons I have our guests go first is, one, I want to be polite, and I know that some folks can't always stay till the end, and that's totally fine, but I want bigger audiences for our guests. But the other is, selfishly, I'm more awake at the beginning, and I want to enjoy it as a Jew in the pew, and that has certainly been the case this Shavuot from you both. Thank you. Before I dive into my text, so what I want to talk about is Exodus chapter 19, and and with that, the story of Mount Sinai and climbing Mount Sinai. Now, I want to start personally, because like I said, I climbed Mount Sinai, or did I? I don't know. I climbed what people call Mount Sinai, and I figured I would tell you a little bit about that. Has anybody here done that? No? So it's in the middle of the Sinai Peninsula in what's now Egypt. Was for a while under Israeli control. And I went there in December of 2010. And when I got to Mount Sinai, first of all, when you start climbing it, you start at about 1 o'clock in the morning because the Sinai Peninsula is so hot, even in December. But in the middle of the night there, in December, it's freezing cold. I remember that, it was so cold. And we started climbing. There's no cities around. And you can see every single star in the sky. And I climbed this mountain, and there was a pathway that went up. And there were other pilgrims that were climbing. I remember there was a couple of Christian pilgrim groups from Nigeria. And I thought to myself, this was the hardest hike to this day I've ever done in my life. And yet it was middle of the night, so it wasn't hot. It's just, it was so steep. And I brought 2 giant jugs of water. And I remember this one Nigerian pilgrim, about halfway up, just collapsed. And I gave him one of the jugs, and he just chugged the whole thing. And it was, I was 22 at the time. I don't know that I could do that now. But it was so intense. And I thought to myself, how did Moses, who was 80 years old, do this? I mean, it took him 40 days, 49, So he took his time. But how did he do this? There was no pathway. There was no whatever. And then I got to the top, and we all huddled together. Everybody just huddled together because it was so cold, so bitterly cold. And we waited for about an hour. And then we saw the sun rising. And it kind of detracted from it and added to the experience. All these Nigerian pilgrims stood up and started shouting at the top of their lungs, wailing, screaming and crying and shouting, "Thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, Jesus, thank you, God," as the sun rose. And it's the most beautiful sunrise I've ever seen, because, like I said, there was it must have been around Rosh Chodesh, because it was Rosh Chodesh, because I remember this, it must have been exactly, because it was in the middle of Hanukkah, so it had to be around Rosh Chodesh, because there was no moonlight, and there were no cities around. It went from pitch black, where we were staring into an abyss of nothingness, and then we saw all of the desert of Sinai light up, and all these mountains below us. Now, the rabbi was saying, was Mount Sinai the tallest, or was it the shortest? And there is that midrashic text that it was not the tallest because of humility. In the Sinai Peninsula, they've said that this, as a result, they've assigned this mountain, which is the second tallest, as Mount Sinai. So we were looking down all these mountains, and it was incredible. And people were crying and experiencing what Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel would call radical amazement. After we saw sunrise, we hiked back down the mountain, and it was, all of a sudden, by the time I got to the bottom, after a couple hours, it was 90 degrees, and I was sweating, and I was taking off all my layers, and So went from so cold to so hot. And so I just, again, thought of, particularly if Moses did indeed climb this mountain, also during Shavuot, should be May or June, what that must have been like for him. At the bottom is one of the oldest churches in the entire world, St. Catherine's Monastery, and it's about 1,700 years old. And this was my luck. The day I visited happened to be the feast of St. Catherine, and the one day of the year the monastery was closed. Should have done my research, but supposedly there's a bush there that they claim was the burning bush. And so this visit to Mount Sinai might have been Moses' second visit, having been there once before at the burning bush at the base of it. And one of the things that Rabbi Korngold talks about in her book was if Moses had cell phones back then, would he have noticed the burning bush? Or would he be scrolling on TikTok or something like that and not see what was around him? But I talked when Rabbi Dreifus was talking a bit about Mount Nebo and how that seemed cruel of God in a way. But on top of just like the cruelty of not letting Moses go into the land of Israel, wait, you're going to force this now 120-year-old guy to climb a mountain? And here with why was God not capable of giving the 10 Commandments at the bottom of the mountain, perhaps, instead of making this octogenarian, who's barely old enough to become president of the United States, climb to the top of a mountain? Well, a few things that Rabbi Korngold says is that, like that gentleman told me in Nepal, hard work makes high reward more enjoyable. Perhaps we've experienced that before ourselves when we've worked really hard at something and then we accomplish it. There's a feeling of satisfaction that maybe we wouldn't have gotten had it just been given to us or had it been easy. Would the 10 Commandments in the Torah be special to us if it was just handed to us? Think about this. How special was manna to our people? It was special in the moment. They were hungry and they got manna. Yeah, Jews, man. Manna fell from the sky. In the moment, they were like, cool. And then they complained. They complained after that of, manna again? I can't stand this manna. And what if, though, they had to go to extreme lengths to get manna? Think about it, we made matzah, and we continue to do it to this day. And manna was just given to us, and it died out after like a couple weeks. Not eating manna today. And so perhaps had the Torah just been given to Moses at the base of Mount Sinai, and he didn't have to work to get it, maybe we wouldn't have continued to pass it. Maybe it wouldn't have been special. And think about this too, because Moses, did he climb Mount Sinai once? No, he came down, saw this whole golden calf thing, chucked the, 10 Commandments at it, and then was like, great, I gotta go back up there. And so he did this twice. He had to work really hard. But that makes a higher reward and more enjoyable. So, who else was on the mountain with Moses? Who else got to climb it with him? Nobody. God says to Moses, draw a boundary, and the other folks aren't allowed to cross it. Now, again, a remarkable thing for us. We are not the only people who have revelation. That is a big thing among Mormons and among Muslims. But when Muhammad received the revelation of the Quran, who was with him? No one. So why do Muslims know that the revelation of the Quran was indeed from God? Because they believed Muhammad. And similarly, with Latter-day Saints, who was with Joseph Smith when he received the revelation of the Book of Mormon? Nobody. This requires a lot of faith in a charismatic leader among Mormons in order to accept that this is true and that Joseph Smith didn't make it up. But for us, we learn that all of us were present. We'll read about this. Even if we weren't on the mountain, we still experienced revelation, and that couldn't have happened without it being on a mountain. I'll explain that in a bit. But for Moses, he's climbing. Like, think about this. Again, like, forget if Moses had a cell phone. But that's one of the great things about climbing in nature is our cell phones sometimes don't work. It forces us to put them away. But had Moses received the revelation of the Torah in New York City, and imagine that if you've been in New York City, okay, maybe nobody else has climbed Mount Sinai, but have we all maybe been to New York City or a big city like New York City at some point? All right. Imagine you're in New York City and you want to get from one place in New York City to another place. You have to go, the revelation of the Torah is at Battery Park and you're at Central Park. What do you have to do to get there? You have to navigate around a lot of people. You have to walk through Times Square and see all the bright, shiny lights. You have to, maybe you take a shortcut and jump onto the subway and have to go through the turnstile and encounter the fascinating people who are on the New York subway. Stop for traffic and stuff. And deal with the constant honking of horns. There's a lot of distractions. But when you're climbing a mountain, you are focusing on one foot after another, and you're able to tune out distractions around you and be present and focus. Another reason this had to happen on a mountain. But when that Nigerian pilgrim took my water, I said, "Do you need some water?" He just took it and chugged the whole thing. I was like, "Well, there goes my water." What do you think he said to me? Kind of. Thanks. Oh. He didn't really say, he collapsed. And I reached the water out and said, "Do you want some more?" He just took it and just started chugging. And do you think it was because he was being rude? No, he couldn't speak. He couldn't speak. He was so out of breath. Think about that. Like, if you sprinted or if you did the most physically exerting thing of your life, and then, are you going to give a big, long speech? You're going to be out of breath completely. You won't be able to talk. So, when Moses finally got to the top of Mount Sinai, this was a time for him to listen. This was a time for him to be out of breath, and maybe he was able to muster the word, "wow." But this was an opportunity, as God gave us the Torah, for him to be quiet and to listen to God. And this is sometimes what Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel says in one of his books, Man is Not Alone, is that God begins where words end. So, but what's interesting, every year at Shavuot, I usually teach on one of the 10 Commandments. And I tend to focus a lot more, and we all do, on the language of the 10 Commandments. Like, look up here at our ark. We have the 10 Commandments on here. We don't have a mountain. We focus more on the language as opposed to where the revelation took place. And by the way, I'm standing way up here talking to you all on the Bima. And that's where we receive Torah. When we do Hagba, somebody comes up here and they lift the Torah and we all stand. And everybody else is down here looking up. And we are reenacting in that moment Moses holding up the Torah and the people at the bottom of the mountain receiving revelation. Because the word Bima literally means high place. So, we think about this in terms of with Moses climbing Mount Sinai. Here, this guy had gone nose to nose with Pharaoh, and then he had to part the sea, right? The Sea of Reeds, and people had to go through that. But conquering a mountain, I was a few weeks ago at Mount Everest, and I was thinking about how people call it, people call their most difficult thing that they're trying to accomplish my Everest. Oh, that's my Everest. Getting my PhD, that's my Mount Everest. Climbing mountains is difficult, and they're massive. And they are made to make us feel insignificant, and we need that sometimes. When I was in Nepal, there was a young woman who was with me on a hike one day, and she lived in Dubai, and she didn't know too much about geography, and so I was telling her about Mount Everest. And Dubai is home to the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest skyscraper. And she asked me, she said, well, which is taller, Mount Everest or the Burj Khalifa? Is it taller than the Burj Khalifa? I looked at her, I said, yeah, it's taller than Burj Khalifa. Mount Everest is about 12 Burj Khalifas stacked on top of each other. She couldn't believe that. She could not believe that. Like, that blew her mind. She was like, what, is it even as tall as the Burj Khalifa? Like, it's 27,000 feet taller than the Burj Khalifa, actually. And so, no matter what we as humans try to accomplish, and here in Dubai, they might say, we have the world's tallest skyscraper, and apparently in Saudi Arabia, they're wanting to build one that's even maybe twice as big as the Burj Khalifa. It's still insignificant when it comes to mountains. We cannot equal God's greatness, and this humbles us, and perhaps not only does it give us humility, but it also makes us feel insignificant, which isn't a bad thing, because that gives us not only humility, but a sense of awe. And that we're shaken out of an illusion as a result that we're in charge and we're the most powerful thing in the world. Because there's going to be things beyond our control, like death and earthquakes and stuff like that, and that those mountains are still going to be there even when we're not. So that's something I don't know, to think about, is perhaps the revelation at Sinai could not have happened unless it was done at a place that reminded us that we're insignificant and this is greater than us. And we need to go to great heights in order to receive this. So let's take a look actually at time we have at Exodus chapter 19. You can find that I distributed some Eitzchaim Chumashim, page 436. So it says, on the third new moon, after the Israelites had gone forth from the land of Egypt, on that very day, they entered the wilderness of Sinai. So when is this happening? Like, when do they get to Sinai? Same, kind of like I was saying, Rosh Chodesh. It's dark outside at night. Having journeyed from Rephidim, they entered the wilderness of Sinai and encamped in the wilderness. Israel encamped there in front of the mountain. And here, I'll read one more verse. And Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob and declare to the children of Israel, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. Now, there's some teachings here about what it means that Israel camped there before the mountain. Talk a bit about that. What does camping do, by the way? Hope you come on the call. I'll be on sabbatical, so I won't be there. But, Danny, good to see you. You showed up just for my teaching. You're like, all right, I will come for the 10:30 show. Appreciate you. What does camping do for folks? Think about that if you were camping with your community and your group, not just as a family. Yeah, Caleb. Good. It brings people together. How often we had camping experiences, and again, particularly, when camping as a group of Jews, somebody says, I don't know how to pitch a tent. Can you help me? And somebody's helping them pitch a tent. I don't know how to make a bonfire. Can you help me make a bonfire? Or, oh, I forgot this. Do you have an extra one of those? Yeah. Camping can bring people together. And us Jews are notoriously at times a bit at each other's throats and arguing with one another and stuff. But camping out there in front of Mount Sinai, where supposedly every Jewish soul, past, present, and future, was going to be, according to Midrash, it gave us a chance to be not only physically, but to become spiritually united with one another. And to have a physical boundary right in front of us that we couldn't necessarily walk past. And that's something to think about, too, is that with a mountain, we all have to get around it somehow. But also, no matter what, if we are crossing a mountain, there's a common place that you'll meet, no matter what direction. Like when I flew past Mount Everest, I was wondering to myself, am I on the Nepali side or the Tibetan side of it when I was looking at it? But what do those sites have in common? Where are people going to meet? If I'm climbing from the Tibetan side, where am I going to meet a person who's climbing from the Nepali side? At the summit, which is the goal. So even if we take different paths through a mountain, even if we come different directions and stuff, we share a goal of reaching a common place. That's significant. We all have the same destination. And we can compare that with other places of pilgrimage worldwide, whether it's Jewish or like Mount Zion or Jerusalem. Think about that. Like right now I can tell you Jerusalem is that away. How do I know that Jerusalem's that away? Pardon? Yeah, how do I know that though in this room? That's the ark. We pray that way. And if you dropped me at a synagogue in India, I'd have to face west to get to Jerusalem, but I would know where that is. So that's would be where the ark is. So even though we're facing different directions, we're facing towards the same place. But also for non-Jews, we see that whether it's Mount Olympus or Mount Fuji, those are places where people come together in holiness. So a mountain, it forces us to reach a higher place. Let's keep reading a bit. Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. Indeed, all earth is mine, but you shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. By the way, where God's sharing this is interesting. That's at a mountain. It's kind of like when God talks to Abraham. This was on a mountain, and it says, your descendants will be blessed. This is on top of a mountain. And when God talks to Adam, the first person, Adam, and says basically this world, you are going to be a steward of it, we learn that that's on top of a mountain too. The Garden of Eden was on top of a mountain, looking out at everything else. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel. Moses came and summoned the elders of the people and put before them all that the Lord had commanded him. All the people answered as one, saying, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And Moses brought back the people's words to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, I'll come to you in a thick cloud, something that's up in the sky, in order that the people may hear when I speak with you, and so trust you ever after. All right. Then Moses reported the people's words to the Lord, and the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and warn them. All right, I want you to pay attention to this part. Warn them to stay pure today and tomorrow. Let them wash their clothes. Let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day, the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people on Mount Sinai. You shall set bounds for the people round about, saying, beware of going up the mountain or touching the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be either stoned or shot. Beast or man, he shall not live. When the ram's horn sounds a long blast, they may go up on the mountain. So they do get to go up. You just have to wait till they're ready with, again, sound of a shofar, something that connects us again to the Akedah, the story of the binding of Isaac on the mountain. Moses came down from the mountain to the people and warned the people to stay pure and wash their clothes. And he said to the people, be ready for the third day, and do not go near a woman. It doesn't work in my house. But again, this is ancient, so there's things about purity with that by those beliefs. Now, so what we have here in these 5, 6 verses, let's say that I wanted to climb a mountain. Let's say it's Mount Everest, or even something smaller, Mount Rainier. Can I just go and climb Mount Everest or Mount Rainier and be like, you know what, I feel like doing that. I want to get up, we'll fly to Nepal and go to Everest and then, climb up it. I'll be back in a week. Yeah, how would that go? What would happen to me? Yeah, I'd die, like literally, and I would die. You have to have the right materials, the right clothing, the right preparation, the right supplies, enough food. You have to have a Nepali Sherpa take all your stuff and climb with a whole house on his back and then take the credit like you did it by yourself. There's a lot you have to do, and you have to even train for the oxygen levels. Train your body appropriately. That's part of the things with a mountain too, and with receiving the revelation of the Torah at Mount Sinai, is not just saying, I'm going to give this to you, but you need to prepare yourself for this. You need to be physically prepared and mentally prepared to receive this. And you also have to respect as well boundaries and respect danger. And yeah, train for this. So Sinai, in a way, it becomes a metaphor for a type of spiritual discipline. And so what happens should somebody go up that mountain before they're prepared to do so, or before they're told to do so? What does God say will happen to them? They'll die. Again, much like I would have trying to climb Mount Everest. I literally die. But so this mountain represents something holy, but also dangerous. And there's a great responsibility that comes with that. And we can't expect that everything that's sacred is immediately accessible. And so I don't know, what other types for us as Jews, what are, Heschel, I keep talking about Heschel. He was a smart guy. He talks about in his book, Sabbath, about how when really places are not holy in Judaism. Like I said, we have this beautiful synagogue. We've made a few aesthetic differences, but I think it's a beautiful synagogue. During COVID, I still came and led services here and looked at these cameras and hoped people were watching. And I realized how unholy this building is, because it was not serving a purpose during COVID. It was a giant paperweight on Heritage Way here. What was holy was the moments that we have in here, and that's what Heschel talks about, is the time we have in here, the celebrations, the challenging moments. And so when we experience holiness in Judaism, whether it's a pilgrimage to Israel or wherever, or fasting at Yom Kippur, praying in the synagogue, observing Shabbat, there's often boundaries that need to be built around that in order to create that sense of holiness. Now let's look at the next few verses. Kind of probably wrap up with that. I want to be mindful that it's late. Let me just look at my notes. Make sure I don't skip anything big. But okay. So with verse 16, on the third day as morning dawned, imagine that you are there. Remember, we were all there. Every Jewish soul, past, present, future, was there. When I bump into another Jewish person, I'm trying to figure out where we know each other from. Where'd you go to summer camp? Okay, where'd you go to college? What synagogue did you belong to? And we cannot figure it out. It must have been at Mount Sinai. That's where we met. On the third day, as morning dawned, there was thunder and lightning and a dense cloud upon the mountain and a very loud blast of the horn. And all the people who were in the camp trembled. Moses led the people. They must have thought it was the end of the world. Moses led the people out of the camp toward God, and they took their places at the foot of the mountain. So they're physically actually going towards God. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, for the Lord had come down upon it in fire. Smoke rose like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled violently. The blare of the horn grew louder and louder. As Moses spoke, God answered him in thunder. So Like that might be the most dramatic image in the whole Torah. Just imagine being there, how like again, I don't say this as if you don't matter, but like how insignificant you might feel in that moment, how powerless, and how not only humbled, but awestruck you would be, feeling this earthquake, seeing maybe a volcanic eruption right before you, and yet you're going towards God, and you're hearing this blast that's getting louder and louder and louder. In the anticipation that's growing and growing and growing as you're about to receive the Torah. Man, could that happen in a city? Would we really notice if we were in the heart of New York City and horns were blaring? No. Or if the ground was shaking, I'd be like, oh, this must be on top of a subway car. But this is being in a mountain, looking up and experiencing that. That's unbelievable. And this becomes an experiencing God itself and a bridge between two worlds. And ultimately, that's how many ancient peoples would see mountains. Oftentimes, if there was a volcanic eruption in Mesoamerica, well, the gods must be angry at us. Let's chuck a person into the volcano as a sacrifice or whatever. Like, because that's where we meet God. So it becomes a cosmic place where two worlds are meeting. And we read that in the very next line. So the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain. And the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain. And Moses went up. What juxtaposition do you see there in that verse? Good, yeah. Here, say that.
God came down and then Moses went up.
Well, again, this is like where a mountain, no matter what direction you're coming from, where people are meeting, where Moses now is going up and God is coming down. And we might have that where Rabbi Dreifus generously offered, and I'll take him up on that, to host us next year at Temple Har Shalom. Come up the mountain. And I have a feeling next year we might have fewer Kolami folks and more Har Shalom folks, because oftentimes we see physical boundaries with stuff. When I lived in Seattle, it was Lake Washington, if you know Seattle, where people were like, I want to have to cross to the east side, is what we would call it, or it's, I don't want to go into the city, because you had to cross this physical boundary, this lake. Or in Los Angeles, where I live, it was mountains where people were like, I have to cross from the valley to the city, or vice versa. I have to go through these mountains. And here as well, I've noticed that sometimes when Federation does their stuff up at Liz, how often do you hear that when Federation does a Park City event where the Salt Lake people are like, you mean I have to go all the way up there, or if it's down here, why do I always have to come down to the Little America? Every time you hear that. And so those physical, us Jewish professionals are gluttons for punishment. Those physical boundaries, sometimes it might just be easier if I say, hey, Rabbi Dreifus, how about instead of doing it at Kolami or at Har Shalom, let's meet at the Jeremy Ranch Country Club halfway. And so by climbing Mount Sinai, this is not like Elijah going all the way up to the heavens, or God coming all the way down to earth. But God's saying to Moses, why don't we meet halfway? Why don't we meet halfway? And if you think about it, not only is the summit of a mountain pointing towards the heavens, giving you a direction, But Mount Everest in particular, that is the closest place on earth from heaven to earth. That is the first place where heaven and earth will meet, is the summit of Mount Everest. And I think that's why people want to get there so badly. And what's the tallest town in Israel? It's Sfat, one of the 4 holy cities in Judaism, because the Kabbalists said, if I want to experience God, what Kabbalism really is like, I'm telling you all about this trip that I just took, but imagine you took it. Or when I was in Delhi, I ate at one of the best restaurants I've ever eaten in my life. It's called Indian Accent, and it has been, for the last 10 years, ranked the number one restaurant in all of India and in the top 50 restaurants in the world, and I had the most luxurious meal for about $90 there. Amazing, go there. And I could describe in vivid detail where you are imagining it, the food I ate and the ambiance and all that stuff. But how would that compare to you actually being there and enjoying it yourself? That's what Kabbalists said. We can read about God and we can study God, but what if we actually experience God? That's how they created the Kabbalah Shabbat service, where we have L'Chadodi, where we are guests at a wedding as God and Shabbat come together right as the sun sets. That's for us to experience God, not just read about God, as the Misnagdim were doing. They said, we want to experience God. And so where did they do that? They did that at the highest elevated place, highest elevated town in the land of Israel, Sfat, that they painted the whole town blue so that they could actually feel like they were in heaven. It's amazing. And so this is what we see, is that in this moment, God says to Moses, you go up and I'll go down, and we're going to meet halfway. We're going to meet at the very first spot where heaven and earth meet. That couldn't have happened anywhere else. So let me wrap up here, because it is very late. One of my congregants enthusiastically asked, we're going to go all night, Rabbi, right? Anybody want to do that? I think you can. All right. By the way, I talked about this during Pesach when I did a teaching in anticipation of my sabbatical, where all the things that happen in the Torah, whether it's Mount Moriah, Mount Zion, Mount Ararat, or where the Ark of Noah landed, like all these things happen in mountains and moments of, and Rabbi Dreifus was talking about this in our conversation, those allow for moments of transformation. That's what we see in the Torah, is that these are places where we experience transformation and develop spiritual insight as well. But I want to ask you, why did this happen in the middle of Bamidbar, in the middle of the wilderness? Why not when we got to Jerusalem? I mean, Jerusalem's our holy city, and it's on a hill. Why not there? What do you think? Again, so Rabbi Korngold talks about how holy moments don't happen in cities. Why couldn't it have happened in Jerusalem?
At the beginning of the text where you started us, there's a note on page 437. Israel encamped there. And it says, until now, all the verbs referring to Israel had been plural. They journeyed, they entered. Here, for the first time, the Hebrew verb for encamped is singular, suggesting that only when they transcended their differences and quarrels to become one people were they fit to receive the Torah. And it just seems, you can't, when you're out in the wilderness, you're not distracted. and they were able to become one. I think that's why it had to be in the wilderness.
Thank you, Liz. And I think about that. I mean, obviously, I think Har Shalom exists because for a couple reasons. One, I think as the population in Park City grew, it was nice to have a place in Park City where you wouldn't have to schlep all the way down for a Shabbat service. You know, there's physical things there, but also at the time, there were certain things that Kolami was not doing that were needs in the community, like having rabbis officiate interfaith marriages and stuff like that, that Har Shalom was more open to. And so there was a need there for that. But often, like when I lived in Los Angeles, I would notice that within a mile, there were 5 synagogues that were basically all the same. And I was like, why do these all exist? I mean, and there were differences. Maybe one was big and had more programs, the other was smaller and more Hamishy and people like that. But ultimately, what I often found out was, and we've even seen this here before, little breakouts and stuff, is somebody said, well, I thought the rabbi at that place was a moron, and so I went and we started our own place. And often when we're in cities, we find ourselves saying, looking at those differences. But out there, like Liz was saying, perhaps in the wilderness, we didn't focus on our differences. We focused on our commonalities. But if it took place in Jerusalem, that would make a massive political statement. This is our city. This is our holy city that God gave us and is also inside of our kingdom and inside of our land. Mount Sinai happens in the middle of the wilderness, in no man's land, in a place that is not a part really, that at the time was stateless. Even if you go there today, there's not much infrastructure, and it was Egypt's, and then it was Israel's, and then it was back to Egypt. There's not much there. And so there's less politics around it, less ownership around it, of this holy thing happened on my property. Even with Sinai today, again, yes, it's part of Egypt, but it's actually in a part, Egypt is in Africa for the most part. Sinai is in Asia. It's in this part of Egypt that's kind of like not Egypt, but is still Egypt. Kind of like if the Declaration of Independence was signed in, Philadelphia is always proud of that. Like, America was born here. What if the Declaration of Independence was signed in Puerto Rico? We'd be like, yeah, it was signed in America, but kind of, sort of outside of America. That's like what Sinai was. And at the time, remember, we had left Egypt, so it wasn't part of Egypt. So it's in this ownerless place. It's out in the open, and that's important because what we are reading with that too is that the Torah and its message is available, and it's open, and it's accessible for all who are willing to go and put in the effort to receive it. Chag Sameach. Thank you all for staying so late. You get rabbi points from all the rabbis here. And Modim L'Simcha, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, rabbis, for coming and sharing your Torah with us. We appreciate it. Thanks, John, for being here, keeping our security open late.